It's interesting. The eastbound lane is owned by the city of Seattle. The westbound lane is owned by King County. All of it is a state highway. Shoreline does not start until the far edge of the sidewalk. So there's a couple things going on. One of the reasons that council preferred the 145th alternative is because of improvements that it would mean for 145th. We all know 145th is a mess. With the telephone poles in the middle of the road, can't have a wheelchair, can't take a stroller, can't walk with small children. We're very well aware of all of the problems with 145th. Light rail is an opportunity. Again, it's catalyzing investing or taking advantage of the regional investment in light rail. So if the station is at 145th, there will be a lot more discussions about what happens on 145th. The city has been talking with Seattle and King County and the state about potentially acquiring that. There may be improvements that need to be made as part of a water system in the next 10 to 20 years. So 145th, there's a lot at play.
Okay.
And yeah, we're aware. I'd talk to Alicia for more details.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Hello. I live in this yellow zone on the 145th map here, and so I have concerns regarding that. And when it comes to terms like property acquisition and board preferences and decisions, they're intimidating, and some of the information that supports that's intimidating, if not overwhelming. So I came in and I originally saw these documents on the west wall here, and I asked, is that possible to access online? I'm kind of looking at the crowd, and I assume that they're not all young, tech-savvy college kids that are familiar with websites and tabs and drop-down menus and such. So just for redundancy, I would like for some clarity as to how to access this information. Well, we mentioned the criteria maps, and then you mentioned that this meeting is being taped. I was wondering if it was simply an audio taping, if it's a videotape as well. Is the PowerPoint slides, are they going to be accessible as well?
Yes, we will. Again, www.shorelinelaw.gov/lightrail. We are going to post the video for this. We have not yet posted the criteria maps, but we will. We're going through a little bit of staff transition, so we kind of lost our woman who used to take care of all that stuff, moved to the clerk's department. So we're in a little bit of because we're not all that tech savvy necessarily either with uploading videos and the other things. So the criteria maps currently are available. They were part of a planning commission packet. If you want to go home right now and look at the maps, the May 2nd Joint Planning Commission City Council meeting, these maps are all attached to that staff report. We will, on the website, create a matrix that shows every meeting that light rail has been discussed. It will have the minutes, it will have the meeting packets, so you'll have all of the same information that the city council or the planning commission has gotten. We'll make that really easily accessible on the website. Right now we have a video of a speaker series event that we had with someone from the Growing Transit Communities program. We've got the frequently asked questions. As I said, soon we'll have an interactive walking map, and that is going to be the clearinghouse, and we will update it frequently. As I said, with always the next meeting dates. So the point is to try to make it really convenient and easy. If you have a question about light rail, go to this site and you can get to Sound Transit's website or the 185 SCC website or find out about the senior service event. So, or services.
Thank you for that. I did have one more point, and that is when I've had a dream since before you guys have even talked about light rail in Seattle. I was born and raised in Shoreline, and went to all the schools here, Shoreline High School before at the year they closed it. And I always imagined the light rail running right down the center of I-5 and having access front to it with bus routes and things that handle the different neighborhoods next to I-5, maybe getting you to the light rail. And that would allow the DOT to expand the width of I-5 at any time in the future without having to deal with any existing infrastructure. If it ran down the center of I-5, it would be the least intrusive on all the properties, in my opinion. That's all I wanted to say.
Oh, okay. So
Can I have the other one? I don't like. Okay. There's no median in King County that we can be within. Basically, it's a Jersey barrier, and it's about 4 inches on either. Maybe it's 6. There's not enough space to put light rail in the median. What you see on this map is, starting in segment B, we have some space. So we are asking WashDOT to look at a placement of the alignment in that median. But in King County, it's not really an option because of how constrained they currently are.
There's no working with the DOT to acquire those 2 center lanes that are shoulders at this point and create lanes to the sides?
Right. So we are working with DOT to figure out where we can put it. We also have to look at what they want to do in the future with a constrained system. So they have limited right-of-way in King County, especially between Northgate and, let's say, 145th. They need to be able to meet their design requirements for safety in terms of how wide those lanes have to be and having shoulders and such for safety purposes. Mm-hmm. And they also have to have the ability, if they have the funding, to be able to address the congestion out there and expand and to maybe potentially add somehow more lanes. So between the existing conditions, in terms of the fact that you have a Jersey, there's no space. If you go past the freeway station, you see that there's a grassy area.
I'm specifically referring to an elevated line that
So
travels.
okay, so an elevated line is
footprint.
sure. So elevated line has some of this the same restrictions in that area. You have very limited space for them to go out in King County. You have the requirements of putting piers or columns. I used to work for WashDOT, so putting columns or piers down the median, and what kind of spacing you would need, not only for the cars but for the train. So it would be cost prohibitive, very challenging, and very disruptive in terms of their service. It's not something that. I don't want to speak for WashDOT, but from the discussions we've had with them, with the constraints that they have and the cost that it would be, it doesn't seem very highly unlikely for that to be occurring. Okay. It's makes more sense. I shouldn't say that, but it would be easier to do north of the freeway station. The other thing you talked about is that transit service. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That is what our intention is in working with King County Metro as well as Community Transit, is to provide that service to the stations.
Yeah, because that's what I think one
Yes.
of the gentlemen mentioned before, is that there was this sense where we were thinking about perhaps solving our transportation issues, not exclusively through light rail, mm-hmm. but using a bus system that was more centralized down a corridor mm-hmm. with neighborhood bus systems to get access to that rapidly.
Right. Yes, that is the idea. That is the objective, working with Metro and Community Transit.
Okay,
and Alicia McIntyre, our transportation planner, that's a big part of her role in this, is to, over time, she's got good contacts with all of the different transit agencies, and she'll be working on to coordinate how that service gets rearranged.
Okay, thank you guys.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, my name is Paul Frazier. I'm from Seattle, and I think it's actually really cool that we'd get a light rail coming through. That's neat. The only problem is, as a concerned citizen, you have to understand where we're getting our direction to do this. And as strange as this might sound, I think it's from the UN, because Shoreline, I know definitely Seattle, lots of other cities have signed up with ICLEI. ICLEI is a membership that costs $600 to join this. So now you got your cities and towns and so forth not planning themselves anymore. You've got a group that's set up outside of our country. This ICLEI is set up out in Germany that you're paying your dues to. You can look it up, ICLEI.com. And that's really strange. So I believe that you guys are the ones, we should plan our communities, not have some outside entity planning it for us. Because what happens is you start to see, well, did we decide it, or did somebody else decide it for us? And I think we know best. The way I got turned on to this was from a good Democrat in California, and she's a Rosa Corey. She's a forensic commercial real estate appraiser. I'm just reading this from her book, specializing in eminent domain valuation. So she knows about real estate, and that's important. Her nearly 30 years of experience analyzing land use and property value enabled her to recognize the planning revolution sweeping the nation. While fighting to stop huge redevelopment projects in her city, she researched the corporate, political, and financial interests behind it, like today, and found UN Agenda 21. Rosa speaks across the nation and is a regular blogger on her website at Democrats Against UN Agenda 21. This book here is something everybody has to read, so you know what is behind this. Behind, this is, you couldn't even made this up. It's called Behind the Green Mask, UN Agenda 21. She speaks in front of city councils and affects change. So I really want you to take another thought about this before you go forward and read this book. It's available on Amazon. I get nothing out of this. I'm just ordinary citizen, that's all. Concerned citizen. Is there anything that you have to say about this?
I can explain very broadly what Agenda 21 originated as, and then everyone is welcome to do their own research. There's a number of different theories about what it means or what's really behind it. Very generally, in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro, there was an environmental summit, much like they had in Copenhagen or other years. They came up with some very broad livability principles that are commonly smart growth, and it does involve some, as I mentioned earlier, having compact growth around areas that already have infrastructure, so you're not sprawling and taking up natural lands. That's really all that it is. ICLEI used to stand for International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives. Now it doesn't. ICLEI does not have staff in Seattle, so it would be very hard for them to carry out a broad global agenda. But you know, there's lots of different theories about this on the internet. But generally, there's some very broad livability principles that are very common in smart growth or sustainability literature. We are not getting our direction from Germany. That's all that I can say about that.
I would say I don't agree with you. I didn't say it came from there. The directives are imposed by UN. If I said that wrong, my apologies, but it's the UN Agenda 21. They are implementing that through the cities and towns. The membership costs $600. CTAC's even doing this. I was not saying, you guys are smarter than all this. Why don't you run yourselves? I don't get it. But I think the real argument here is it's collectivism versus individualism. And individualism has to do with you. Collectivism is just going with the flow and whatever, right? Have your head in the clouds, whatever you're told. So I think we're adults here. Of course, we can make our own decisions out here. Thanks.
Hi. So earlier you mentioned that the choice of homeowners to have their homes bought or purchased would be based on whether developers came and asked or not, sort of. I live in the weird little triangle corridor that's in between 175th and 185th and 5th Avenue and I-5. And when I look at the map over there, it's pretty much the red line goes, can't see my house on there because it goes right over my house. I'm curious, I just bought there in October, and so any positive things I might be thinking about light rail are currently kind of have a big red line going over the top of them at the moment. I'm curious, who is the best person for me to get information from to find out how long I have before I know whether or not my house is going to be purchased or whether it'll stay. I don't know.
So the first, as I mentioned earlier, we're starting with the study area, which is the red line, which is what we're going to study. Then we go to comprehensive plan designations, which is kind of a range of this might be an appropriate type of use here. Then we get to zoning. So when we get to zoning, it's likely that some of the areas closer to the light rail will be what we call upzoned, which means a higher density will be allowed. That at that point, developers may take some interest in trying to assemble parcels or create a project, and that's when they would start approaching homeowners. So again, right now we don't know. Over the next year, as we get to zoning, then we'll make those decisions, but that's all going to be a very public process. We want you here to say, yes, that's an appropriate use here, or no, it won't work for these reasons. Again, and the developers, trying to create development scenarios, again, that's the part that's the homeowner decision. You have the option to sell or not to sell to a developer. You have the option to stay in your home forever. Nobody is going to force you to sell. So that's kind of where that comes in.
Well, if the actual light rail line, though, goes over, that steps outside of developers, correct? I'm just confused about that. That would be more of a
That's a slightly different scenario.
slightly different scenario. Okay. Okay, that's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Hi, Liz Poitras from Shoreline. I noticed on one of the slides that if the station is at 145th or 155th, it would be elevated. So I am assuming, maybe incorrectly, that it's not just the station that's elevated, but that the whole train in that area is elevated. And I'm wondering what that's going to mean concerning noise to those who live east of the elevated area.
That's correct. You have to, depending on if the station is elevated or at grade, you have to connect to it. So there will be sections of the alignment to the north and south of the 145th and 155th stations, which would be elevated. One of the things that we've learned since the beginning operation of light rail is what kind of noise can be generated and how to mitigate it. So one of the things you'll see in our draft environmental impact statement is that we are looking at noise walls on the line itself. So if you may have seen this, but if you look when you're driving down I-5 next time, there are sections where you see a black wall along the rail, and that's basically a noise wall to mitigate the noise of the light rails of the light rail train. So noise should not be any worse than it is today with that train running by.
My name is Ed Yosko. I'm from Seattle. I see this as a part of a bigger agenda, this transportation of light rail. And I'm really concerned that that it does, if it was a locally initiative, really locally derived, I would be for it. But this is really you say it was a theory. It's not really a theory. I'd like people to understand there are information about this kind of agenda, understanding sustainable development for agenda for the 21st century. That's why it's called Agenda 21. And this booklet is by freedomadvocates.org on the internet. And it's to inform the people as well as public officials about what the sustainable development is all about and how it ties into the agenda that was put forth at the Rio conference back in 1992, and ever since has been implemented throughout the world. And in the United States, it was signed on by President Bush, the senior Bush, and then Bill Clinton, in his administration, he formed a committee to disseminate this type of agenda throughout the nation, from the federal level down, and it's been gaining traction ever since. And I'd like to talk about the funding. The list of money sources for the implementation of sustainable development, such as American taxes, fund the federal agencies, and then they implement sustainable development. Over 2,000 NGOs are non-governmental organizations, are accredited by the United Nations for the purpose of implementing sustainable development in America, and are given massive tax advantages. Some of these non-governmental organizations are the Nature Conservancy, the Sierra Club, the National Audubon Society, the American Planning Association, which is involved with this light rail thing, the National Teachers Association, the United States Chamber of Commerce, and the United States Farm Bureau, among others. But the thing is, another thing is the funding. I would like to ask the panel up there, do you know what comprehensive annual financial reports reflect for each governmental level in this state, from your Port Authority to your cities and towns to your school districts?
I'm a little confused about the question.
The question is funding for projects.
Yes.
In the comprehensive annual financial report comes out once a year at all levels of government. For instance, your school district has one, your city has one, your state has one, your county has one, and they all report the financial condition of that governmental agencies for the year. Now, a small portion of that annual financial report reflects the budget, but the budget is like 1/3 of the total financial situation for that government. Well, the other 2/3 are never reported to the public, we the people. And for instance, the city of Seattle in the year 2011, their net take from investments was $2 billion plus after paying the expenses and so forth. And each year, these CAFRs increase and increase. So do you know if any of that CAFR money, which is never publicly referred to us, the people, are they used in some way to invest in companies that will then build these things? Like, for instance, we see a lot of these smart growth buildings popping up like mushrooms in Lake City, Northgate, everywhere. They're, the ones that have condos on the top and just the retail section on the bottom. They're just tearing down buildings like crazy, blocks of it, all around. It's just popping up like mushrooms. And a lot of them are on the light rail, proposed light rail system. And so I want to know, what are the incentives for these developers? Where are they getting their funding? What kind of breaks are they getting? What tax breaks are they getting? What is the real reason for all of this growth that I see along these corridors? Who's benefiting from it financially?
Okay, well, so we have about 1 minute left that we'd had in the group discussion before we were going to break up and people could talk individually to folks. If you have questions about our city's budget, it's all transparent, it's all online, there's a huge budget book. You're welcome to look through it, check every line item.
Why don't you answer the question in a nutshell?
I'm still confused about what the question means. You're asking. We have a program for property tax exemption in the city in 2 areas specifically that requires some level of affordability. In other areas, it's more for economic development, for building multifamily or office buildings, and that's an economic development initiative. Thank you.
I'm Mike from Seattle, and I don't bring any conspiracy theories, and I like compact development. But my question is about elevated versus at grade. The scenarios said that all of them, that 155th and 145th would be elevated, and the other 2, 130th and 185th, might be elevated or surface. So my first question is, where is it likely to transition from elevated to surface, and how many times? And second is, does that grade doesn't mean traffic crossings, the train stopping at traffic lights? It would be going over intersections?
Second question's easier than the first. So we do not have any potential traffic with automobiles. It's either at grade with I-5 or it's elevated. So it's separate from car traffic. Depending on the station and the alignment, there's 155th, for example, you would be elevated, if you're elevated at 145th, you would stay elevated through 155th. And depending on north of there, you could come back down from 155th, depending on the alignment. Then you're going to go up over 175th. And it depends on the alignment at 185th. It depends a lot on which station, and if the next station is elevated or not, exactly where the touchdowns are, or if there are touchdowns. It would be a lot easier to talk to you about it with the draft environmental impact statement, because it does vary a lot based on the different stations.
That's what I want to know, is whether it was going to go up and down a few times or many times, or you weren't sure either way. It sounds like you're not sure either way.
Well, it's depends is not a good answer. I recognize, but if you're elevated to 130th and you're elevated at 145th, it's going to be more elevated. If you're at grade at 130th, but you're elevated at 145th, you have section that is at grade and then it goes elevated. For example, does that help?
That's what I mean.
Yes. So you want the specific streets?
Exactly the
okay.
specific streets, but is it going to go up and
Is it
down
going to undulate?
several times? Is it